I can't buy an EV because I can't charge at home. How many times have I heard that one? And how many times have I replied, I can't buy a petrol car because I don't have a petrol station at home? It's clearly ridiculous. Of course they can get an EV, even if they live in a 16th floor flat. What they're really saying is that they don't believe they can get the utterly ridiculous overnight cheap rates of 6 or 7 pence per kilowatt hour that those who can charge at home do get, and I fully agree. But is that enough to stop you getting your first EV? It definitely should not, because you're ignoring two critical factors. I'm Dave, this is Dave Takes It On. Let's just go back to basics. Not everyone buys an EV to save money. Some people buy an EV because they care about pollution or climate change. Pollution is recognised as a major killer around the world, and in the UK causes between 30 and 40,000 premature deaths a year. Well, some choose an EV because it offers staggering amounts of really useful tech that they simply can't get in an ICE car. Once you get rid of that lump of an engine running on fossil fuel, you can do far more. In the summer, for example, you can leave the air conditioning on when you park to go shopping. It runs silently straight off the battery. It's brilliant if you've got a dog in the car. Well, no, not brilliant, absolutely essential. It is illegal to leave your petrol engine running if you're not in the car. Well, likewise, in the winter, the ability to pre-warm and defrost your car while you have your breakfast. So it's nice and toasty with clear windows when you eventually get in. Yet others want one for the sheer performance. Even fairly modest EVs these days have a 0 to 60 time well below 6 seconds. And that easily beats cars like the Lamborghini Miura that I was horrified to see ruthlessly shoved off the cliff in the Italian Job. And that one took 6.3 seconds to get to 60. Or the Ferrari 308 GTS that I watch Magnum PI drive around Hawaii every week. That takes 6.7 seconds. Imagine that. You can get a 30 or 40,000 pound EV and beat Tom Selleck away from the traffic lights in Hawaii. But then you remember that in 1978, when it launched, it only cost 15 grand. Well, others just prefer the simplicity of driving an EV. Most people quickly get used to one-pedal driving. EVs are not automatics, they're a single fixed gear. Well, apart from some nutters trying to con us into getting back into gears once again. Why? The sheer simplicity of getting in, pressing a profile button, and the seat, steering wheel and mirrors adjust to your chosen settings, no matter who else has driven it in the meantime. Then you just select forward or backwards. The rest is just 1 foot on the accelerator. No starting the engine, no clutch, no gears, no gear paddles. You just press down to go. And stopping is a revelation. Take your foot off the accelerator and the car actually brakes for you. That's regenerative braking. The car does it for you. Effortless. Or put it into one of the driver assist modes and the car will keep you between the white lines and below the speed limit without even having to use the accelerator or the steering wheel. But cost saving is always there, and it is here that EVs make the biggest difference. No petrol car ever made can top up at a price anywhere near that which people who can charge at home actually pay. The average petrol car to fill up from empty will cost you, for, I don't know, 60, 70, maybe £80 at a garage or a supermarket. And for that, you're going to get about 500-mile range. The average EV charging at home overnight while you sleep will cost you £3 or £4. And that'll give you 250-mile range. Okay, so you have to top up once to get the same range. I'll do that next time when I'm asleep. That's still just £6 or £8 for the same 500 miles. Oh, by the way, if you have solar panels and a home battery, which is definitely a boom industry at present, then the cost of topping up your battery could actually be zero. Can't do that with petrol. Well, that cheap price is definitely one of the driving forces behind people getting EVs. And in the UK, about 2/3 of us can charge at home. But for the 1/3 that cannot, they must use public charging, and that is definitely not priced at 7 pence per kilowatt hour. Some CPOs, that's the charge point operators, those that operate the public EV chargers, charge very nearly 90 pence per kilowatt hour. That's 12 times the price that I pay. That is definitely not cost effective. But they missed two important major developments. But first, they just need to accept they will never probably get the same rate at a public charger that we who can charge at home get. You definitely can't at the moment, possibly never will. Although some of what I'm seeing in development recently might be about to change even that. There's much more on that shortly. But why try to compare your costs to mine? Surely the cost comparison you should be using is what the alternative petrol or hybrid car is actually costing you. This is what you're paying right now. What you pay every time you top up your tank at a local petrol station or supermarket. Your choice is to carry on doing that at whatever price it costs, or getting an EV and reducing that. Because always using public EV chargers sensibly is definitely much cheaper than what you're doing right now. Well, let's set the benchmark. The average petrol car is grossly inefficient, converts about 1/4 of the heat you produce when you burn fuel in it into movement. The rest is just wasted. You've got a massive big radiator on the front to try to get rid of some of that wasted energy, and the rest of it mainly heads down your exhaust pipe and into the lungs of passing pedestrians. You buy petrol at the moment at around £1.30 a litre. Because most of us use miles per gallon, that means a gallon costs just a few pennies short of £6. Most UK cars get between 30 and 50 to the gallon. So to drive a mile costs you between 12 and 20p. So a really efficient petrol hybrid car will give you a running cost of about 12 pence a mile. But the average, bang in the middle, is 16 pence, and the inefficient one's 20 pence. It matters not what car you drive. The average is simply £6 cost of fuel divided by your car's MPG. An EV has a very similar equation, but we store energy in kilowatt hours, not gallons, and therefore we measure our miles per gallon as miles per kilowatt hour. Our EVs likewise travel different distances per kilowatt hour of electricity from our battery, and that ranges between 3 and 5 miles. Now, this is one area where the EV has a massive advantage. Since about the year 2000, after more than 100 years of development and advancement, the average petrol car has reached its peak efficiency. The official miles per gallon figures you see on the windscreen and the actual miles you get out on the road are little changed from 25 years ago. In many cases, some of them have actually gone worse. EVs, in contrast, they're all brand new. Yeah, I know they were invented before petrol cars well over 100 years ago, but the technology back then was absolutely crude. It was lead-acid batteries, for example. It was only in 1990 that the modern lithium-ion battery was invented, so EVs still have about 50 years of development until they get to their peak efficiency. In plain English, 20 years ago, most EVs could only get 3 or 4 miles from a kilowatt hour of electricity. For today's EVs, the standard is now 4 miles. Most are up above 5 miles, and the first EVs to get 6 miles per kilowatt hour are actually already being manufactured. We've yet to see where our electricity consumption will settle, but cars will continue getting more and more miles out of each kilowatt hour as the years progress. And that makes a massive difference. If an old EV like mine only gets 3 miles per kilowatt hour, it'll use between 50 and 100% more than a brand new one. Simple as that. That makes a massive difference in the cost wherever you charge, unless you get it free. Well, that takes me to another major difference with charging an EV. You have so much choice, so much more choice where you buy your electricity and how much you pay for it. Petrol car drivers basically have just 3 options. Supermarket for cheap fuel, about £1.30 at the moment. The oil giants Shell and BP, for example, for quality fuel, about £1.35. Or motorway services for getting ripped off, about £1.56. Nobody in the right mind would choose to go and fill to motorway services by choice. That would make each gallon well over £7. But likewise, no EV driver would voluntarily pay more than they need to. Some public chargers sell about 80 pence per kilowatt hour. Most supermarket prices are nearer 70p, and many independents are offering between 39 and 55p. Well, that's a huge difference. None get down to 7p. You just have to live with that. But let's have a look at a modern EV using these different prices. Well, at the top end, this is the motorway services end equivalent. An EV that gets 3 miles per kilowatt hour will be paying about 27 pence a mile. By the way, this is always the figure that those who are trying to prove their petrol cars are cheaper use. At 4 miles a kilowatt hour, it costs us 20 pence a mile, and at 5 miles per kilowatt hour, it costs us 16 pence a mile. Definitely not exciting. In fact, a bit dearer. So those out to prove that a petrol car is cheaper to run than an EV, carry on using those figures. You're correct. However, just like you wouldn't fill up at the motorway services, so any EV driver that pays these prices really needs their bumps felt. What are you thinking about? Is money so meaningless to you? If you go and visit a supermarket, you can find much cheaper prices. That still gives you between 14 and 23 pence, so not there yet, but getting closer. We need to drop down to the next tier, and you can get prices down as low as 40 pence. There are thousands of places scattered throughout the UK to charge where you will pay as low as 40 pence, and there's a very good number that drop way below that, down to 30p. But let's stick with the 40 pence, and we get the least efficient EV paying 13 pence a mile, and the most efficient now paying 8p. Yeah, 8p a mile. Well, picture the scene. You have a petrol car, and on your next trip to fill up, there's a huge sign saying half price fuel. How big a queue would you expect to find? An ordinary EV with no ability to charge at home will give you the equivalent cost as your local petrol station, slashing fuel prices in half. Is that not worthwhile? Are you really going to put off getting an EV because you'll end up paying more than me? Remember, by comparison, you already pay between 12 and 20p. So now we have a genuine saving. And if you can find one at 30p, plenty about, you can do some basic research, get yourself a new EV, does 6 miles per kilowatt hour. You'll be paying 5p a mile. That's the equivalent of 120 miles per gallon. And there are a few petrol cars that get anywhere close to this. But EV charging does not stop there. We launched a video recently, there's a link to that down below, that identified the top 5 ways to get totally free EV charging. Yeah, free. And before anyone says it, my home rate is still 7p, but I currently get totally free charging out on the public chargers. Well, now we enter into a different league altogether. I could literally just jump in my car, drive from here to John O'Groats or Land's End and back totally free. And nip to the shop free, and of course no pollution. So forget comparing what you have to pay compared to what I pay. Instead, look at what you're paying now and what you could be paying when you get your first EV. Stop whining about how little I pay and start celebrating how much more those silly petrol car drivers have to keep paying than you would in your brand new EV. Well, as a final note, we've recently seen some of the developments for those that cannot pull off the road and charge at home, off-street parking. Previously, this was just cable gullies, which many councils do not allow. Now technology is catching up, and I tried this out just this week to get a really cheap EV charging session at a public charger in Liverpool. We visited the Liverpool Power Up event, and there's so much going on at the moment. This is just the start. There is an awful lot of work going on to help those specifically who cannot charge at home. And from what we heard from the leader of Liverpool City Council, those properties where they cannot charge an EV at home are actually being targeted, for they can find out through demographics where they are, which of those are likely to be buying EVs, and then target just those specific roads and streets and areas where they're likely to have an EV but cannot charge at home. Huge amount happening, and you really got to understand that within a year or so, this is going to be a very different situation. At the moment, if you can't charge at home, you are limited. You do have to do a little bit of research. But don't forget, this is just one-off research. Once you've found your cheaper source of charging, just go back and use the same one every single time. You don't need to do this research every time you go and charge your car. It's a bit like in a petrol car. You tend to find where the cheapest fuel is that you want to use, and that's the one you use most often. So keep an eye out for this. Thanks very much for watching. If you've enjoyed it, please click the like button. But if you'd like to see more like this or to hear more about these developments, please subscribe, click the notification bell so we can notify you whenever we launch a video. Thanks very much. I'm Dave.